It has been nearly 12 years since the last execution of a death row inmate out here in Idaho. The longest standing inmate on death row is about to be executed today, February 28th, 2024, and man, is his story a wild one. So, grab a coffee, grab a blanket, and let's dive on into the killings of Thomas Creech. Born on September 9th of 1950 in Hamilton, Idaho, he supposedly had a terrible childhood. Between his parents arguing and finally getting divorced and eventually living with his father, who years later would die of unknown causes directly in front of him. Creech would also later state that he attacked his father's nurse when she walked in after the death. Though the few years after are just hearsay and unsubstantiated claims by him, no one really knows what went on between the time that his father died up until about 1968, where he was sentenced to a 2 to 50-year prison sentence for the unarmed robbery. He then was later paroled in 1971 and later married in 1973 to a 17-year-old named Thomasine Lauren White of Boise, Idaho, who allegedly became a participant in at least one of his murders, but again, that is also unknown. She was eventually moved to a psychiatric hospital in Salem, Oregon, where she subsequently committed suicide. Creech later claimed that she was raped by a gang of men and thrown out a window, which caused her debilitating physical and mental injuries that were the primary contributions to her decision to end her life. On August 22nd of 1973, he broke the conditions of his parole by allegedly stealing 13 cartons of cigarettes in Portland, Oregon, and then the charges were later dropped after he was admitted to a psychiatric hospital for a mental evaluation. Creech was housed in an open ward and was described as a model patient during his short stay. He then was later released about a week later, and it was determined that he did not suffer from any mental illnesses, and he then moved back to Portland, where he found a job as a sexton for the St. Mark's Apostle Church. He later quit that job after the body of a man was found in his living quarters, and shortly thereafter, he and his new girlfriend, a 17-year-old Carol Spaulding, would move to Idaho. November 6th of 1974, Creech and Spaulding were hitchhiking in Idaho from Lewiston south to Donnelly when a 1976 model Buick Century operated by two house painters, 34-year-old Edwin Thomas Arnold and 40-year-old John Wayne Bradford, would pick them up. Along the way, Creech pulled out a rifle and shot both of the men in the head, then later their bodies along Highway 55 in Valley County near Donnelly, north of Cascade. Their bodies and blood-spattered car were later found the next day, and in the meantime, Creech had then befriended a 26-year-old named Gene Alvin Hilby, who later agreed to bury the rifle on his property at the behest of him, unaware that it was also a murder weapon. 2 days later after the murders, Creech was proposed as the suspect in the two additional murders in Oregon, and supposedly sending death threats to the newly elected Colorado Governor Gary Hart. He and Spaulding were arrested in Glens Ferry in Elmore County by police officer Bill Hill, who had been notified that they were fugitives wanted for murder. While both of them were arraigned on murder charges, Creech was cleared of his supposed involvement within the death threats. It was later determined that it was just rumors that were spread from police officer, one of Hart's campaign managers, and a prosecutor. Briefly held at the Valley County Jail in Cascade, Creech was later transferred 90 miles south to a more secure Ada County Jail in Boise. After about a week from his arrest, Creech attempted to commit suicide by slashing his wrist with a broken mirror, but he only sustained minor injury before being restrained by prison guards and moved to another cell. Hilby, the man who buried the murder weapon, had originally also been charged with participating in the murder, but was later released on probation after pleading guilty to hindering a murder case. In January of 1975, it was determined that the now 18-year-old Spaulding would be tried as an adult for the 2 counts of first-degree murder. Creech continued to cause trouble. Even after his arrest on June 16th, he attacked and injured his cellmate William O. Fisher during an altercation. Fisher was then later driven to the hospital to treat his facial wounds, but unfortunately there is no further information as there was a gag order later placed on this case. About a month later, Creech attempted to sue the Idaho Statesman for supposedly violating his right to a fair trial by publishing information on other crimes he was either convicted of or suspected of, thus possibly tampering the public opinion against him. In August, shortly after the change of venue from Cascade to Wallace in Shoshone County, Creech was sent to the hospital for stitches after suffering injuries on the head due to him falling out of his bunk in his cell. In October, it was ruled that an alleged confession in which Creech, who initially had claimed was not near the murder site, says that he had shot and killed the two men after they pulled out a knife and threatened to rape Spaulding, could be admitted as evidence in the upcoming trial. After taking the stand in his own trial in October of 1975, Creech shocked the entire nation when he readily admitted his responsibility in 42 murders in nearly a dozen states. He alleged the first murder occurred when he was 17 by drowning a friend in New Miami, Ohio, and in his confession, Creech claimed that he killed a gay man in San Francisco in 1965 after running away from home, and then later killed 5 more people in Idaho in contract murders while he was with the Hells Angels, and later began killing people in satanic rituals involving human sacrifices. In total, he claimed to know of such killings that had occurred in Vernon, Washington, San Diego, San Francisco, and Malibu, California, as well as Beaver, Ogden, and Salt Lake City, Utah, Tulsa, Oklahoma, Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Missoula, Montana, Wichita, Kansas, and another city in Colorado. He also later directed the authorities to 2 alleged burial grounds in Los Angeles County, where he claimed they could locate 100 victims, but the searches eventually turned up nothing. While his confessions were shocking, authorities considered most of them bogus due to the fact that a lot of his wording had been copied from the satanic rites word for word from an issue of Playboy magazine. Nonetheless, they were able to link them to murders of 9 victims in total, none of whom were killed in supposed satanic rituals. Gordon Lee Stanton and Charles Thomas Miller in Las Vegas, Nevada, 22-year-old William Joseph Dean, the man whose body was found in his church living quarters in Portland, Oregon, 19-year-old Salem store clerk Sandra Jane Ransamog, who was killed not long after Dean, 22-year-old Reugley Stewart Mackenzie near Baggs, Wyoming, and 50-year-old Vivian Grant Robinson in Sacramento, California. Among his credible victims, 70-year-old Paul C. Schreider, who was stabbed to death in an apparent robbery at the downtown Motor Hotel in Tucson, Arizona, on October 23rd of 1973. Creech, who at the time was working as a cook in the El Bambine Cafe in Beaver, Utah, was later arrested for disorderly conduct and identified as the suspect after a routine police check revealed that he was wanted for Schrader's murder. Creech and Thomasine White, his first wife, was later charged with that murder, but the pair was acquitted only hours after deliberation. Creech pled guilty to the murder in 1943 of William Joseph Dean in Portland, Oregon. Creech was also convicted in the murder of Vivian Grant Robinson in Sacramento, California. He has 5 murder convictions in total, and just days before the rejection of his clemency plea in 2024, Creech was found to be the true perpetrator behind the unsolved murder of Daniel Walker in San Bernardino, California in October of 1974. While he has now considered a self-admitted serial killer, Creech continued to profess his innocence in the Arnold and Bradford murders. The jury just took a few days of deliberation in order to return a guilty verdict to the case due to the confusing circumstances. His attorney, with the assistance of a private investigator, John Wickersham sought to interview additional witnesses in order to have the conviction overturned, and 5 months later, on March 25th of 1976, Creech was sentenced to death by hanging for the two murders. Originally set for May 21st, his conviction was stayed pending appeals, with Creech willingly offering to stand trial for some of his killings in Oregon and California. He was later convicted of these killings. As a result of the 1976 Supreme Court ruling of Gregg versus Georgia, which led to changes in the death penalty sentencing, one of Creech's attorneys, Bruce Robinson, sought to have his client's death sentence commuted to life sentences, citing that his sentence violated the state's then illegitimate death penalty statute. Robinson's strategy proved to be a success, as Creech's sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. Robinson additionally petitioned for Creech to be freed altogether, but was unsuccessful. Creech was housed at the Idaho State Correctional Institution east of Kuna. He worked as a janitor in the prison despite the protest of two prosecutors who warned the wardens that he still posed a threat even to other inmates. Their fears were realized on May 13th of 1981 when 23-year-old David Dale Jensen, a car thief who had previous altercations with Creech, was murdered by Creech with a sock stuffed with batteries. There are two theories over the murder, which Creech himself changed at different points in time. The first theory was that Jensen attempted to attack Creech using the sock of batteries, and then the second theory, in which Creech claimed at his 1980s sentencing hearing, involved different inmates offering to pay Creech for killing Jensen, since he was not well liked at the prison. In that scenario, Creech, through an intermediary, gave Jensen weapons to attack Creech to justify killing Jensen, essentially setting Jensen up to be killed. Regardless of the pretext to the murder, Creech managed to take hold of the sock and started beating Jensen with it, repeatedly bashing and kicking his head, causing Jensen's death. Jensen, who was a car thief, was disabled, which impaired his ability to adequately protect himself in prison. Charged with first-degree murder, he changed his plea to guilty and was sentenced to death. The sentencing judge acknowledged that Creech did not instigate the fight with the victim, but the victim, without provocation, attacked him. Creech was initially justified in protecting himself while balancing the aggravating and mitigating factors. However, the judge also identified 5 aggravating factors and stated that the murder, once commenced, appears to have been an initial calculated act, but the victim, once the attack commenced, was under the complete domination and control of the defendant, concluding that the murder and the violent acts Creech took went well beyond self-defense. He asked the victim's father for forgiveness and stated his wish to be executed, as he did not want to die in solitary confinement. However, Creech had changed his mind, having appealed his sentence for Jensen's murder for over 40 years in the lead up to his execution date. Creech expresses sorrow and anxiety towards his execution. Since his second death sentence, Creech has been housed in the Idaho Maximum Security Institution, where he is also the longest-serving inmate. One of the prosecutors at his original trial, Jim Harris, later said in an interview that he wished Creech to be taken off death row, as he considered that his case hadn't cost the taxpayers too much for an execution that possibly may never happen. In 2020, Creech and another death row inmate, Gerald Pizzuto, filed a federal lawsuit in which they claimed their rights were violated by the state's sanctity surrounding the execution protocol. The lawsuit was later thrown out by the U.S. District Judge David Nye, citing their ongoing appeals as a primary factor of why it has no current standing. On October 12th of 2023, Judge Jason D. Scott signed Creech's death warrant, citing his execution date for November 8th of 2023. On October 18th, the Idaho's Pardons and Parole announced they would delay Creech's execution date after they granted a request from Creech for a continuation hearing, making Creech the third death row prisoner in Idaho's legal history to be giving a clemency hearing. On January 29th of 2024, the Idaho Pardon and Parole Board deadlocked 3-3 on whether to grant Creech clemency, As the vote to grant clemency was not a majority, his death sentence was upheld. Governor Brad Little, who had the ultimate authority on whether to grant clemency in capital cases, chose to not grant Creech clemency. On January 30th of 2024, Judge Jason D. Scott again signed a death warrant settling Creech's execution date for today, February 28th of 2024. After the death warrant was issued, Creech filed 2 appeals. One was to call for another clemency review on the grounds that it was made in the absence of the 7th parole board member who backed out prior to the vote, and that his participation was required to ensure a fairer outcome for Creech's clemency hearing, while another was to declare his death sentence, which was handed to him by a judge and not a jury, as unconstitutional. On February 9th of 2024, the Idaho Supreme Court dismissed Creech's pleas, and his execution is still set to occur on today at 10 a.m. The Idaho governor also declared publicly that he has no intention to spare Creech from the punishment due to the magnitude of his crimes. The 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for California also rejected Creech's appeal on February 23rd of 2024. Creech's lawyers sought to have his death sentence overturned on the grounds that it was unconstitutionally imposed by a judge and not a jury. But the judges admonished his lawyers for not raising the issue earlier and without providing credible evidence to substantiate their claims, and they described his motion as an act of delay for the sake of delaying his execution. Jensen's family publicly opposed the clemency plea for Creech, stating that Jensen was a, quote, gentle soul and a prankster who loved hunting and spending time outdoors. And Jensen's daughter, who was 4 when her father died, stated that she never got to know her father and felt aggravated that Creech was still alive even after years since her father was murdered. Creech's supporters continue to advocate for the continuation of his death sentence to life in prison on the grounds that Creech had reformed and he was no longer a threat to society in spite of the enormity of his crimes. And that is the story of Thomas Creech. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I will keep an eye out as I'm editing to see what happens. As of recording, it's about 30 minutes until he is set to be executed at 10 a.m. This is the first one, like I said, in over 12 years. The last one was in 2012, and the one that was after that, the man died before lethal injection. So let me know what you think down below. Do you think that he did kill 42 people and he was just giving the police runarounds to not show where the bodies are? Let me all know your thoughts down below. And with all that being said, I hope you have a spectacular week, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.